Tere, oleme Loomuse Akadeemias. Tänane saade on küll ingliskeelne, aga ma teen hästi lühikese sissejuhatuse eesti keeles. Räägime kängurutest. Hiljuti vaatasime ka filmi, mida saab ise veel internetist ka järgi vaadata, kellel ei olnud võimalik kinno tulla. Tänane külaline on Dror Ben-Ami. Hello, Dror. Thank you for coming. I made a little introduction in Estonian, but now in English. Dror is a zoologist, and he has studied wildlife biology and conservation, and specifically about kangaroos. He is in Center for Compassionate Conservation in Middle East, and also co-founder of the think tank for kangaroos. Hello.
Hello, thank you, Faristamo, and it's a pleasure to be on your program. I'm so happy that in Estonia you're taking an interest in kangaroos, which are dear to my heart. So I think I'll just maybe provide a background about the kangaroo industry in Australia, so your listeners become a bit acquainted. There are four large kangaroo species: the red kangaroo, the eastern grey kangaroo, the western grey kangaroo, and the wallaroo. And these kangaroos are mostly along the eastern coast, but also along the southern coast and in the west coast of Australia. And they are killed commercially. About 1.7 million kangaroos, adult kangaroos, are killed every year by commercial industry, so by professional hunters. They're shot usually at night in remote locations, and probably 10 to 25%, even 30% of those kangaroos are females. So then we have another 200,000 to 400,000 dependent young that are collateral damage. So they are not used in the industry, they're simply killed and thrown away. So altogether about 2 million kangaroos that are killed annually for the commercial industry. And there are also another million kangaroos, or half a million to a million kangaroos that are just killed as pests by farmers. And Europe is the biggest importer of kangaroo products. It's 50% of kangaroo products go to Europe. And so we have been organizing a campaign that is asking Europeans to ban kangaroo products. And we think that if we succeed, then that will bring down significantly the amount of kangaroos that are killed in Australia. And we've already had success with Russia, which used to be responsible for 70% of kangaroo exports, kangaroo products, and enacted a ban in about 10 years ago. And the number of kangaroos used to be 3 million. It dropped to about 1.6 million. So the impact was dramatic. And we hope that we can do something similar if we get the European ban on kangaroo products.
Mm-hmm. Which are these kangaroo products that are imported to EU?
So the EU receives meat for human consumption, so like game meat that you get from deer, in the same way, and also leather for luxury goods, primarily in Italy for fashion or for car industry, and also for soccer shoes. So Nike, Adidas, Puma use the leather in the shoes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And this campaign you were talking about, can you describe it a little bit more in detail?
Yeah, sure. So we are working with EUROOPA, lobby the European Union and Commission, and we have three main issues that we're working on. One is the welfare issue. About up to 40% of kangaroos are not hit in the head when the hunter shoots, and then they have a very slow and painful death. This is because the shooting is done at night, and the kangaroos are difficult to spot. Also, the joys is a huge issue. So we have 200 to 400,000 joys that are hit on the head to kill them, or the head is cut off, and this is the result of the commercial industry. We have a sustainability issue. We're looking at regional declines of kangaroo populations. So in some areas, we don't see, after there's a commercial hunt, we hardly see any kangaroos. And so we're quite worried about the populations, the local populations. And finally, there is a hygiene issue. So the meat that is sent to Europe, kangaroo meat in general, is generally full of bacteria and salmonella. In order to clean the meat, it is washed with lactic acid and then sent to Europe, and is sold as fresh meat, fresh game meat, but in effect, it is not clean and potentially dangerous to Europeans, particularly as we've had COVID, and we know that most disease come from wildlife. Most pandemics that are in humans come from wildlife.
A few things about this meat that has this bacteria. Do Australians eat kangaroos?
Yes, Australians eat kangaroos as well. It's not I have to say, it's not a big market in Australia. It's a small proportion of Australians eat kangaroo meat. Also in Europe, it's not a big market. You know, it's a small market. But even though the market is small, the significance for kangaroos is very big. So in a way, that is why we're saying Europeans don't eat kangaroo meat. Do a ban. It has no impact on European industry whatsoever. But the impact on kangaroos will be great.
How is it with sustainability issues? In the movie, there was one plot that this data, there are big misunderstandings around the data. Yeah,
so kangaroo populations are surveyed every few years, every 2 or 3 years. Australia is huge. It's a continent, and the distances are vast. And so the population surveys are done from airplanes, and where maybe 1% of a certain landscape is surveyed with the plane, the few kangaroos that are visually sighted from the airplane, are then extrapolated to the whole landscape. And this is then the kangaroo population in the landscape. Obviously, you know, if 100 kangaroos become 1 million kangaroos in the landscape because of this extrapolation, then it doesn't say really anything exact about the kangaroo population. It's just a rough estimate. And what we see is that in certain locations, kangaroo populations drop very dramatically, and that drop is not reflected then in the overall numbers that the population estimates give us.
So one problem is that people really do not know how many kangaroos there are.
We think so. We think that estimates are provided as a way to justify the commercial killing and to say, look, this is sustainable, but this is a sort of greenwashing. It's not really showing what's happening on a regional scale. When I say regional, I mean kangaroo harvesting or commercial killing happens in in zones. A zone might be the size of Belgium or the size of Estonia. That's one area, and there are a lot of these areas. So we really, as you said, we really don't know what is happening to kangaroo populations across the landscape.
And the other thing was what you also talked a little bit about, how they are killed, and if that makes any sense at all.
So, you know, the kangaroo industry has a code of conduct that that shooters must follow, and kill the young in a certain way, and kill the adult kangaroos in a certain way. So the problem is that, first of all, there's no regulation of the code of conduct. It's impossible to follow shooters at night in the Australian outback. This is vast areas at night without any inspection. So although there are certain codes, and Australians government will say, well, we have a way that the hunters must act, it is not supervised and not enforced, because it's impossible to. So we've done our own checking. I've been involved in investigations where we've seen that up to 40% of kangaroos are not shot in the head, which means that maybe they're shot in the jaw or in the chest, and then they suffer a very slow and cruel death. And of course, the issue with the joeys, where we have every year 200 to 400,000 joeys that are either smashed in the head, or their head is cut off, or they're just left in the landscape without their mother. They suffer a terrible death. Now, even Australia's top animal protection organization doesn't condone this practice. The Royal Society for Protection of Animals, RSPCA Australia, says, you know, openly, females should not be killed, because it's impossible to, even if the female is shot in the head with a clean shot, it's impossible to make sure that the young don't die a terrible death. But you know, these complaints, even by Australia's top welfare organizations, it's not animal rights, right? Just welfare organizations, conservative welfare organizations, are not being implemented in the kangaroo industry. So this is a terrible issue. And you know, Europe about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, perhaps banned the imports of harp seals from Canada. So this is the same thing, except instead of a harp seal being hit on the head in the ice in Canada, you have kangaroo young that are hit on the head, or you know, something similar happening in Australia in the dark. Even more, like the numbers are even higher, but nobody sees it. It's at night. So this is what we're saying. There's already precedents in Europe, and we'd like the Europeans to take action on this issue as well.
Yeah, there were some extremely sad moments in the movie also, and we got feedback that we didn't warn people enough, and people were not prepared that
yeah.
Someone kills the kangaroo baby with the foot. Yeah.
This is what happens. This is not exaggeration. This is actually in the code of practice. Unfortunately, this is what the hunter is supposed to do, and it's horrific. It's unacceptable.
But this idea or the point of view that kangaroos are pests, where does this come from? Is it because there was also that kind of investigation mentioned that actually kangaroos and sheep are not competing on the same grass. So how do people end up there?
So, you know, Australia has a long history of I mean, livestock, cattle and sheep were brought to Australia about 160, 70 years ago, when the first Europeans shortly after the first Europeans came to the Australian shores. And they brought the sheep and cattle to the areas where the kangaroos are. And from those times, there is a perception that the kangaroos are competing with the livestock for food and sometimes for water. And the research that you spoke about that's shown in the movie is the research that comes from the university where I did my PhD. And it's only in the 1995 did academics measure the competition between kangaroos and sheep and cattle, measured which foods they eat, and how did that affect the amount of wool or produced by sheep, for instance, and whether they eat the same foods. And not one research, there are three or four different research that show that there is very little competition, only during drought perhaps. But because this research was done only in the mid-1990s, it's still not accepted as the truth about the interaction between sheep and kangaroos, you know. And the reason we formed Think was to bring that information to the public. It's hard to change a culture, and you know, in Australia, for the last 150 years, you know, the public just thinks there are too many kangaroos and that they compete. But now that we have the research, we're trying to bring it out and educate, but it takes time.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned also that there is this 1 million who are killed just as pests. What happens to them?
Well, they're shot by farmers, so farmers can get a license to, if they have kangaroos on their land, it's very easy for a farmer to get license to shoot the kangaroos, not as a professional hunter, but just as a person who has kangaroos in their lands. And so that's not part of the commercial industry. These kangaroos are left in the land, you know, they're shot. It's very sad. And again, this has to do with this idea that in Australia, kangaroos are perceived as pests, even though there is no study that supports this you know, this thought. And it's going to take time to change the culture. You know, it's long-held beliefs and are very difficult to change.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the other issue is that the farmers have strong political
influence,
impact, influence in Australia, and therefore the government is always willing to go their way, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which is why we're going to Europe, which is why we're saying part of the reason where we have to go to Europe and say, look, you know, we need to just minimize the external export market and at least not have the industry as a cause for the killing, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, just came to my mind that if there is no this industry cause, would that mean that there would be then more killing because of farmers do that?
No, I don't think so. I think that if there's no industry, the amount of kangaroos, farmers might kill a bit more, but you know, I don't think that the numbers will definitely drop. I mean, you know, if we're killing now 1.5 million, you know, then maybe that number for the commercial industry would drop by about half, at least, you know. And sure, farmers may kill a bit more, but the numbers would be much lower, because the industry creates its own mechanism, its own reason for shooting kangaroos, regardless of what the farmer needs, or want or don't want. So I think it will definitely help. Europe is also, as opposed to other places, the products, kangaroo meat is sold for a very high price, and leather sold for a very high price in Europe compared to other countries, other areas. And so without that kind of extra profit margin that comes from Europe, it'll be very hard for the kangaroo industry to persist. I mean, shooters just won't get much money for the kangaroos that they shoot. And the other big advantage of having a European ban is that on a moral, kind of a moral perspective, for Australians to see that another sort of Australians see themselves as European in origin, and to see that there is Europe morally is rejecting kangaroo products and saying this is an immoral industry, it's an immoral act against kangaroos. It can cause Australians to look in the mirror, you know, and say, oh, hey, maybe what we're doing is not right, you know. Remember, Australia was the biggest whaling nation in the world, and it only stopped whaling in 1970s. And today Australia is taking the fight against whaling, you know, is the leading nation against whaling, and pointing its fingers at Japan, saying, you know, how they're acting improperly unethically against whales. There's no difference between whales and kangaroos. It's exactly the same, the same thing. But Australians can't see what they're doing, you know, they can't see what they're doing objectively, I think. So
there were different kind of uncomfortable and weird moments when the movie described the way kangaroos are killed at night and the way they become meat. There was so much this sanitation problems. How is that even possible?
Again, the kangaroo industry is not well regulated, you know, in spite of what the government says. I've been out there. I've also seen it. Every kangaroo, you know, is killed in a different point in the desert at night, sometimes hundreds of kilometers away from the nearest town. So it's impossible for a butcher to be on site to make sure that the kangaroo is, you know, processed properly after it's being shot, you know, and after the kangaroo is shot, or let's say 30-40 kangaroos are shot, they need to be transported over quite hundreds of kilometers to the chilling location. So this is the nature of Australia. It's so big, and the distances are so great. And the only way to improve that would be to have a refrigerated truck, but the industry is trying to keep the cost down and not having the refrigeration. And so they're kind of the regulation is okay to carry a dead animal for 7 hours, 8 hours in the heat. In summer, it's hot. You know, at night it's also still 30 degrees for 5 months of the year at night, you know, to carry a dead animal with they have to take out the gut, you know, exposed to the dust and flies. And this is what's ending up on the table in Europe, you know. And again, why is it possible? Because I think it's just like the government and the whole regulatory mechanism wants to appease the farmers and appease the kangaroo industry, which has a very strong political voice. I mean, it's not, these standards are unacceptable in domesticated animals, in sheep and cattle, which is also unacceptable. I'm also a vegan, but you know, with kangaroos are not killed in a humane way. They're really unhygienic, and they're wildlife. You know, we're taking wildlife out of the landscape. They're not farmed. These are wild animals that are being taken out of their habitat, you know. So it's an urgent issue.
Yeah, it sounds very weird to hear that animal who is peacefully living in the bushes, people think that they are pests and then kill them in a way they do. In which how to ask it? I mean, this campaign, how long have you already done it, and what are you expecting time frame wise? Like, when do you want this to have a result?
This campaign takes time. The European campaign takes time. We've been doing it for about 5-6 years. The movie came out in 2018, which is really helpful in getting the message across. Unfortunately, we had Corona for for 2 years, so it slowed down the campaign. But we're showing the film and the issue to more and more Europeans. We are getting more involvement from European organizations in various countries, in Italy, in the Netherlands, in France and Belgium, Germany. And as these organizations are bringing up the issue, as your group is also lobbying on at the European Parliament, I think we're starting to make some good headway. There are companies that have banned individual companies that have banned kangaroo products. We are looking for European countries that are willing to individually ban kangaroo products. Maybe Estonia would like to be a first. We're looking for a first country. So I believe we have a few more years to go in this campaign. And the result is a ban. What we want is a complete ban on products.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But how is it in Australia, the overall situation? Can you even say that, for example, percent, how many people think that kangaroo meat is okay to eat, or in that way so-called harvest them is okay, or how people think there?
Well, I think most in the past, I'm talking maybe 10 years ago, a survey would show that most people thought that it was okay to kill kangaroos, and not many people ate it, but it's okay to kill kangaroos. There are too many. I think that these attitudes are shifting now, and in the last big survey that we saw in 2019, I think, before the Corona, the shift is already like 49% thought it's not okay, and 51% were against the killing of kangaroos. So it's shifting. It's work. It's a work in progress. It will take time. Obviously, just campaigning in Europe is not going to solve the issue. It's going to decrease the amount of kangaroos, maybe bring them down by, instead of 1.6, we'll have 700,000 kangaroos killed a year, but it's a huge number. It's a huge drop. But we'll have to keep working in Australia to create coexistence between farmers and kangaroos. This is a big challenge, and we're taking steps in that direction as well. But it's definitely going to take time. In Australia, it will take a good number of years until we manage to get farmers to coexist with kangaroos. We need to create, I think, probably coalition of farmers that don't kill kangaroos, and to show that it's possible to coexist, and then take that forward and work on policy changes, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But Europe is a crucial step. Once we say there's no money to be made here, this is not a profitable industry, then it takes away a big factor that's driving the industry at the moment.
About kangaroos, how fast do they reproduce themselves?
They're like very similar to humans. They will have a young about depending on the species. So we said 4 different kangaroo species, right? Each one living in a different habitat, but from 7 to 9 months. So to give birth to one young. and then they can get pregnant again. So it's very similar to our population growth. They don't breed very quickly. So yeah, it's about one. If you average it out, about 1.2 young per year, maybe 1.1, something like this.
So it's not also very quick process.
It's not very quick. So when you hear how kangaroos are spoken about in Australia by the public or by farmers, and they say they breed like rabbits, and any biologist will tell you it's impossible to have one young every 9 months. So there's a big difference between the biology of the animal, of the kangaroos, and what they're able to do, and what the Australian public perceives them to be. It's just yeah. So this is part of the misinformation that we need to fix in Australia.
It sounds so weird that there's someone who doesn't make so much harm at all, and still people are so against this species.
I think what what makes it so strange, and in Australia, Australians have brought the practice of cattle and sheep grazing from a European landscape that has a lot of grass, a lot of rain, to a very dry country, that doesn't have very much rain at all. It's almost like a semi-arid desert landscape. And because this farming practice is not appropriate for Australia, oftentimes farmers have a hard time making a profit, from their sheep and kangaroos that are eating whatever little green food they can find in the landscape. And the farmers see the kangaroos coming into their landscape. These kangaroos have evolved for millions of years in the Australian landscape. They do belong there, and they see them coming in and utilizing the same resources, and they naturally feel that they are competing with their sheep and livestock and cattle, and it's the intuitive feeling. And but the reason I got involved as a biologist and a campaigner for kangaroos is because when we look at their data, we see that kangaroos do not eat the same things that the sheep and the cattle are eating. They're eating different things, and only in drought in the desert, only then they start eating the same thing. So then they do have an impact, but we can measure it, and we can even predict it, and we can say, okay, once in several years you will have a drought where the kangaroos and the sheep compete, and farmers need help in that period, in that season, or we keep the kangaroos or something, but to kill them every year in the millions is just ridiculous. It makes no sense. These decisions should be based, at the very least, even if you're not compassionate to kangaroos, even if you don't believe in animal rights, at the very least, the decisions of how to manage kangaroos should be based on science, not on what one believes the information they got from their grandfather or from their father on the ranch. It should be based on modern science that shows most of the time we don't have competition. Some of the time we do. And management should be just related to when there is maybe an impact.
Are there also hunters who are coming to Australia as a hunter tourism to kill kangaroos?
No, this is, I'm not aware of this happening in Australia. So yeah, this is more related to Africa or other places, but not to Australia.
Okay. Is there something else you want to add before we finish that talk?
I just want to emphasize how important it is for Europeans to take action, on this issue. Like I said, Europe stopping the ban will save hundreds and thousands of kangaroos every year. I want to say even 1 million, I'm not sure, but close to 1 million kangaroos every year, because we're talking also about the dependent young that are killed in a terrible way. And it will send a message to Australians, hey, look at yourself in the mirror. This practice is not acceptable. It's not ethical. And this could have as big or not even a bigger impact than the ban itself.
Thank you. I very much hope that this ban will happen quite soon. Thank you, Dror, for joining and for doing what you do.
Thank you so much, Faristamo, and thanks for the opportunity.
And thank you, aitäh kõigile kuulajatele. Kohtumiseni järgmine kord. Thank you for all the listeners. See you next time.
Bye-bye.